Okay, so StoryMap is a digital installation, so it was a map that I worked on. And there's loads of really complicated context to it, so I'm just going to try and explain it as quickly as possible because it won't make sense without it. So it's a project with Rift Theatre Company, and Rift were doing a festival called Shakespeare in Shoreditch, and there were 4 plays that were all dotted around Shoreditch, and then they had a hub in the centre, and they wanted something to sort of bring all those things together, and also to reflect some of the historical stuff that happened. So there'd been a festival 2 years ago, and they had a load of content from that they wanted to put into the hub somehow. So it's a project that I worked on, but it was actually led by one of my colleagues, Ben Kozlowski. So he's doing a PhD looking at how digital and physical stuff come together. He's an architect, and he's interested in how sharing happens in public space. So that'll make sense in this context. And the development was actually done by Oliver Smith, who is also well into Meteor, and has a really interesting practice doing this kind of work. So I'll try and describe how it works. It's kind of you had to see it a little bit, but people came into the space. They're waiting to go to a play, and they see this, which is like a little podium. It's got a screen on it. It's got 2 controls on it, and then in front of that, which you can see there, is a big map, and it's a fictionalised map of Hackney. So routed into the surface of it is like a map of Hackney, but it's kind of reimagined as an island, and there's kind of quirky little things in there. And you can't quite see it, but projected onto the surface of that table is a grid. And you can move a cursor around the grid using the 2 silver dials there. And when you alight on a square that has some content in it, it will display on the screen in the podium. Let me just go to the next slide. So this is the grid. You can see it a bit better here on top of the table surface. And the content was tweets that have happened about the festival. So they went on a kind of a journey around Hackney with the Rude Mechanicals, who are doing impromptu plays around various locations. So people tweeted about that, and we located them on the map. And people could also contribute to it. So they could get on a typewriter, type out a little story, and then they could scan it into the podium. So kind of just below the top of the podium was a scanner. You put a sheet of paper in, press the red button, and it scanned it in. Is that a comprehensible thing? Does that make any sense at all? Yeah? Okay. Right, so we built it all in Meteor, so that's the exciting thing about it. And it felt like a really nice decision, so I really wanted to do that, and then Oliver independently said, I'd like to build this in Meteor. And this was the architecture that we used for it. So it's slightly weird because there's nothing intrinsically web about it at all, but it just felt a nice way to do it. So we had a mini Mac in the podium, and that had 2 screens running off it. One of them was the projector, and the other one was the screen. And then there's obviously the dials and the button. So the only way to get the dial interacting into Meteor is to have it pretend to be a keyboard press, and then you use JavaScript to detect the keyboard press. So that was what was going on there. And we had a webcam that was using HTML to access the webcam and do that. So that all happened through the browser. And then separately, we had a web interface for it. So we had an admin console, so you could do things like delete an offensive tweet or something like that. So one of the things that we discovered with it was that there's a lot of latency potentially between you turning this dial, a JavaScript key press happening, like going back into the database, and then coming out to the projector, which has actually gone all the way to wherever the composed database is, to move this cursor around on the map. So what we found was that having the Mac Mini run Meteor locally and look at the composed database moves one of the hops out of this kind of flow of interactions, and that was enough to make it run properly. So that's what we did, and I just wanted to share some lessons from it. That's what I was going to do. So here's what I came up with. So the biggest thing for me was that loads of people know how to do web development, And when we spoke to people about this, the other language that came up was using processing, which is very popular in art schools. It's used for lots of data visualization stuff, lots of interactive installations. But it's a C library, and I'm not clear how many people will be able to support that. Whereas doing it in Meteor, we got this advantage that anyone who's a web developer can at least look at it and understand it quite easily. And obviously, if you know Meteor well, it's a really fast way to work. The other thing we got from it was the admin interface. So that kind of thing would have been really hard to build if we'd have had it just running off just off a computer without a web interface to it. There's going to be an archive version of this. So one of the parts of the specification was that there'd be a subsequent archive to preserve the stories that we collected from around Hackney. And that's going to be much easier to do now. And the other thing was that when Oliver was building this, it was really easy for him to show us what was happening. So he could just put it online and we'd go to a web page and see the progress as it happened. Whereas if it's an artifact that someone's building in their studio, then we have to go to their studio to see what's happening with it. So we had some interesting experience with the Wi-Fi. So I've done this kind of thing before. And the Wi-Fi has been a problem. So we said to the space that we're running it, which is blank, which is just over on Curtin Road, do you have really good Wi-Fi? And they said, our Wi-Fi is incredible. It's the best Wi-Fi you will ever see. And we said, well, we don't believe you. It's so important that we have really good Wi-Fi. And so it's a screenshot of that speed test website, and it's going like unbelievably fast. So we're like, okay, we believe you. You've got good Wi-Fi. Get there, install it, and it's going really slowly. And we're like, oh, what's going on with this then? They said, oh yeah, the Wi-Fi's been really weird actually recently. It's gone really. So the lesson is that if you're going to do any sort of like critical thing, there's an installation, it's just got to be wired. I think like the Wi-Fi is always a problem. Another lesson we learned was that, and this is something I've come across before, but it's always hard to believe. Even the smallest bug is a massive bug when you have to solve it on a projector that's kind of warped over a table with some of the bits of it spilling over the side. So just getting the debugger console up maybe takes you 10 minutes with a mouse trying to make it work. And all that kind of business really makes it feel like you've got boxing gloves on trying to solve this problem. So maybe you just need a secondary screen which you can just use to solve all those problems. So a harder sort of technical limit that we came to with Meteor was that I think we got a bit lucky with the latency, so we did this thing where we had this kind of multi-legged solution where we had Meteor running locally but a remote DB, which allowed us to do a useful thing in terms of being able to access that for the admin console. But I think if it got a bit more complicated, maybe there's some more data going over the wire. Maybe it just slow right down. And that kind of magical tightness that we have between the turning the knobs and moving the cursor around, which makes it feel responsive, might have just disappeared. And you can't really predict when that's going to happen. I'm not sure if I'd know if my intuitions would tell me anything useful about that. And this is the question I was hoping for, like a solution from the crowd for. So it just seems like a terrible hack to have this thing. So we're turning the dial and it's just pressing the letter P when it goes right and the letter Q when it goes left or something like that. So it's just repeatedly pressing that key. And it seems like a terrible hack. But I don't know if there's another way for a browser to get data from a USB socket. Like, is there a better solution to that? I don't know. And the final thing that I noticed was that if you turn this computer off and then you turn it on again, obviously all the windows are all over the place. You have to repoint them at the servers. You have to reinitiate Meteor, all this kind of stuff. And that's really difficult and time-consuming, and it makes it from this lovely, robust thing that could have sat in that space and worked flawlessly into this slightly janky thing that you had to do a load of work with to make it go. So if there's a solution to that, which I'm sure there is, that would have made it feel much more solid, I think. That's my experience of installing stuff with Meteor.